Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining again. Today we start a discussion on the resource server since I bored you a lot in the past 3 lessons talking only about the authorization server. It's time to move on with OAuth2 and OpenID Connect, and today we discuss about the real backend of your web application. Thank you very much for being here with me already. If you are watching the event live, don't forget to have a live chat there. If you are watching the event recorded, you can also leave your questions and comments in the comment section, and you can anytime follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn. With that being said, it's time to go on, and we don't want to lose a lot of time. And I'm going to share my screen, and what you have in front of you right now is actually what we worked on the past 3 lessons, the last shape of the authorization server that even connects to a database and gets details about clients and users from the database. In case this is the first time for you joining, remember this is lesson 14. Lesson 13 was the last one, and in case you don't understand something, is maybe because you didn't follow the previous lessons. So my advice for you is, of course, go and follow all the previous 13 lessons. I will start today talking about the real backend of the application, and let me draw something before going into writing the code, because I want to make sure that everyone remembers what we discussed. So what we talk about is OAuth2, where we have the user, of course, but we have, as software components, we have the client, and we have the authorization server, what we discussed past 3 lessons. And we have the resource server, which is actually just a fancy name for the application backend. So if you want, I think it's even better if we put them like this, where you have the authorization server, which is rather more separated upwards. But what you usually knew as your application is a client plus a backend in a normal, simple backend front-end separation, where of course the front end, usually people think about the front end as being a web app, but that's not necessarily true. It can also be a mobile application, it can be a desktop application, it can be anything that the user directly uses to access resources exposed by the backend. And of course the backend further, this is an abstraction of the backend, because the backend can have various ways of being architected. It can be a monolith, but it can be a service oriented, it can be microservices. So we don't discuss now about how is this architected. For us it will be just the backend, and the backend for OAuth2 has the name of resource server. So that's the backend, and what we discuss up to now is another component, which is the authorization server. Okay, so this is what we discussed in the past 3 lessons, and this is what we do now. Okay, and what you learned is that the front end asks somehow, and there are multiple ways in which the front end can do that, asks the authorization server for a token, gets a token back, and then what you will learn today is that the front end uses that token to authenticate and get authorized at its backend to access resources. And when I say resources, I don't mean directly data. I mean any kind of endpoint that can do anything from sending an email, sending a push notification, to altering or retrieving data from the database. Okay? And of course, then the first question is, because you learned that you get the access card, the token, and then you get the token back to the backend, is how does the backend know that this token is a valid one? So today and in the next lessons where we discuss the resource server, here comes the time to answer the question, how does the backend, also known as resource server for any OAuth2 OpenID Connect implementation, how does this backend know that this token is a valid one? And depending on how you implemented the token, of course, there are different ways in which the resource server validates the token. I see that you have some comments and I will read them before going further. So, because in case something is not clear, I want to clarify them now. So your stream on security is very useful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dan. I'm using your streams to create a project. Very happy to hear that. Hello from Ireland. Hello. Hi, James. I've seen your site that you have some course, but they are non-clickable. So let's talk that separately. Send me an email about that, please. Idea of class with new package via dot separator. Again, I think this is something different, so let's discuss it separately. Leave me some comments. Cover consent screen. Consent screen is actually pretty simple, but yes, I will create separate videos for that because it's a bit of more than detail rather than something fundamental. So I would like to not include all the possible details in this stream, since you, of course, we talked 3 hours about the authorization server. I can bet I can talk about 1 week about the authorization server and still have questions. So let's keep all the details in separate videos. Authorization server can be on the same server. Yes, that's a very good question, actually. Happy that you asked it and happy to answer it. When I discuss about these 3, of course, client is client. So client will be a mobile app, will be a web browser holding, maybe running an Angular or React, will be a desktop. So client is the client. But when we discuss about the server side, the authorization server and the resource server, they are basically 2 responsibilities on the backend side. So that means that theoretically you can have a backend holding both responsibilities. Practically, you will most likely not do that because, well, it's clear here that there are a couple of responsibilities and they are very much apart. So you don't necessarily want to put them together. You usually want to separate them in an architecture that offers you the possibility to easily manage work on them, but also to scale them horizontally easier and stuff like that. So the answer to your question, can the authorization and resource server be on the same server? The answer is technically yes. Practically, I wouldn't recommend you that. Good. I see that you are already very active, and because you are so active, let me actually give you a present. And what I did now is I simply pasted in the chat a free ebook voucher for my second edition of Spring Security in Action. It can be only used once, so the first of you who will use it will get it, the others will not be able to use it. And with that, I'm going to the next part of this video where we start discussing the resource server and write code. We will start with JWT tokens. And if you remember, we said that JWT tokens are non-opaque tokens. Non-opaque tokens means that they hold information. In these videos, for the resource server, I will show you, as I did for the authorization server, both how to use opaque and non-opaque tokens. We will start with the non-opaque tokens, JWT tokens, because they are pretty often used today, and then we will also demonstrate how to use an opaque tokens. I don't promise that it will be everything today, because I'm pretty sure I will not have time for everything, but I will show you both this at least in the next lessons. We will start with the JWT, where the answer to the question, how does the backend, how does the resource server validate the token, it's very, very easy. It's a very, very simple answer. The token, being a JWT, always has a signature. The JWT token has a header, a body, and the signature. And I'm not going into details because I discussed already in one of the previous videos how the JWT looks like, but the idea is that this header and body, they contain the data, while the signature protects the data. Be attentive. Usually a JWT is not encrypted, we discussed that. So when I say protects data, it doesn't hide the data. The data can be seen, and we all always have seen that. whenever we investigate with, for example, JWT-IO, we investigated a token, we could see the data in the header and the body, but the signature itself, it protects the data from being changed. If someone steals the token and tries to change anything in the header or the body, because the signature was applied with a private key using a cryptographic algorithm, only the holder of the private key can create a signature. So if someone steals this, changes the header or the body, then the signature will not be valid anymore. And the resource server, what it has is access to that public key that can be used to validate if a token is authentic or not. So whenever the token flows to the backend, meaning the resource server, validates the signature. And if the signature is not valid, guess what? Well, it doesn't use the token. It simply doesn't authorize you. So that's how the resource server actually makes sure that the details found in the header and the body, which the backend will then use to apply the authorization rules, is an authentic one. It uses the signature. And this way of working this token is so easy, so comfortable, that it now became probably plus 90% of the cases one of the most used. That's why we start with it. It's one of the most used ways of authenticating and sending authorization information from the authorization server to the resource server. 90% plus of cases you will need to implement JWT authentication. In case you don't use JWT authentication, then you would need an introspection endpoint, and we also discussed introspection endpoint in the previous videos, but I will retake it when we start discussing about opaque tokens and introspection. But now we will simply rely on the signature and we will implement a resource server. Good, let's do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project, which will be my resource server. And what I have here is the authorization server that we have written in the past 3 lessons. It's identical. I left it this way, so if you have seen the past 3 lessons, you can see the exactly things that we have done in those past 3 lessons. So I will now create a resource server, going new project, sorry for that, new project, and I'm going to call it SS 2022 because that's when we started the stream. E1, so C14 is today's course. E1, the last long-term supported Java 17, and we use the latest Spring Boot. We want to create a backend web application, so we need the web, we need, of course, Spring Security, and since we create a resource server, I will add the OAuth2 resource server dependency, and this is everything we need, because of course normally you'd probably add Lombok, you'd probably add Spring Data if you have any data source and stuff like that, but we don't want to overcomplicate our example. We want to keep our focus on exactly what we want to focus, and that's Spring Security, okay? And creating a resource server, particularly in this case. Okay. And then I'm going here. I hope it will index soon. And then I will be able to, first of all, go into the application properties and say server port 9090. So I would like to change the port because I will have to run both the authorization server and the resource server at the same time. So if I want to do that, I can't do that with different ports. it's still importing my Maven project, so maybe meanwhile I can answer some questions. Is it possible to override the 401 with a custom response body? Most likely, technically, it's possible to do that in multiple ways. One of them is probably a filter. The other way is probably a REST control advice. However, I would never do that, since 401 is always it's basically the best accepted best practice on saying that something didn't go well with your authentication. So technically, yes, it's possible. Practically I want to do that. Can one use the Auth server as a microservice with Eureka? I'm pretty sure it can be, although Netflix Eureka, if I correctly remember, it's deprecated, isn't it? So I'm not sure if you would like to actually do that, at least not in a new project. So that's kind of again separate question. I can investigate more if you want, but that's what I can tell you at the moment. Then, isn't Spring Security already including the Spring Resource Server library? I'm not sure it does, although I'm not 100% sure. Maybe, but yeah, maybe I have to check that. Sorry. But anyway, it won't disrupt now. If I edit those both dependencies, it should still work. And then I missed your previous Spring Security. Can you brief want to go to learn today? So today we are learning how to write a resource server. That's what we are doing. Do we need to separate configs? No, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure what we are talking about. A lot of questions. Okay, my project indexed, and I will go through the questions later. Thank you very much, by the way, Dan, for your present. And I really hope that my work for the community really helps a lot of people. Now, let's go into writing the configuration. So I'm going to write the configuration, go here and say security config, and in the security config, I'm going to annotate it with add configuration. And then, of course, I'm going to add a security filter chain. Security filter chain has been in the context. And of course, we need the HTTP security object to be injected. And in the end, of course, we need to use this object to build the security filter chain. So I have to return the HTTP calling the build method and throw the exception, of course. Fine. So it looks awesome. Now, one more thing. I will make sure that all the requests are at least requiring authentication. Otherwise, we can't validate what we are doing. And I will create a very small demo controller that we will use to test. So I will separate that in the controllers package, new class demo controller. Say REST controller and public string demo. So if we are able to call this endpoint, then it means that everything worked fine. But to be able to use this authentication mechanism together with the authorization server we created, if we want to use JWT, then we will have to configure JWT as being the authentication approach. So look at this. I do configure. We're using the DSL syntax OAuth2 resource server to make this application a resource server, so to make it act as a resource server. And then I will configure the resource server to use JWT. And the simplest way, and usually today's accepted way, is to apply a keyset URI giving your resource server access to the public parts of the key pairs so that it uses the public part to validate the token. Oh, that's what we said it happens. So when the front end, when the client sends to the resource server the token, the resource server has to validate the signature. How does the resource server know the public key? The easiest way is to provide the resource server with a means to get the public key from the authorization server. Of course, there are ways to configure the public key directly at the resource server level. But if you do that, then it will be more complicated when we have to do key rotations, because if you have the private part here and the public part here configured separately, then when you rotate a key, you will have two places where you have to change the key. Whether if you put both of them here and only expose the public part to everyone who needs it, then you have to change only one side when you do key rotation. So that's why today we use pretty much only this approach, okay? So I need this, and to be honest with you, I don't know by heart. The URL to the keyset URI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my authorization server application, and then I'm using Postman to call the OpenID Connect description endpoint, and then I will find out which is the keys URI that I have to configure in the resource server. And then I will prove you with a flow that everything works as desired. And while this is starting, let me see if I have any other questions I can answer. Is it possible to enable OpenID Connect client registration endpoint or a Keycloak equivalent to manage clients? Maybe, Miguel, if you tell me a bit more what you want, I can answer, but OpenID Connect is enabled here. So first of all, I'm not sure if you have seen the previous lessons, but we did enable OpenID Connect in our authorization server. It can be used with Keycloak as well, but I'm not sure if what is your question. So what about using OpenID Connect? What's your question actually? Because now we are doing that, or at least in my perspective, we are using OpenID Connect. Can you demo how to allow user to access their own data after authenticated? Yes, I will show kind of that today or in the next lesson. Refresh token. Okay, if Angular, if your problem is on the client side, sorry, I will not be able to answer it because I'm not a front-end guy. Multi-tenancy support today, I'm not sure we really run into that today. I'm not sure if we run into that even in the next lessons, and how to separate login authorization server, that will be in one of the next lessons for sure. Okay, now let me actually, one of the things is, guys, I want to take it step by step, because you are asking, show me how to do something like that, but it's so far apart from my point of view. I'm not sure that everyone understands pretty well the simple things yet. So I want to really take it step by step, so everyone who sees this video really understands step by step how to do the things. You can't simply just go into cloud configurations, at least in my perspective, if you don't know the very basics first. So that's why I'm trying to take it step by step. So I started the authorization server. I'm going into Postman. You still know the links. OpenID Connect configuration. Calling it. Here it is. And here it is. That's the JWK URI is the link where all the public parts of the keys are exposed. And then what I'm going to do is copy it here. Of course, never to put URLs or URIs directly in the code. In a real world application, you would put it in the application properties file and then inject it via the value annotation. Okay, maybe it's better that we do that as well here, because I don't want you guys to understand the wrong way. So let's call it JWKS URI, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going here and use this. So let's take it and then inject it using the value notation. Because this way, if you use it like this, of course, the big advantage is that now you can have different URIs for different environments, and in real world, you will have a development or multiple development environments, you have a user acceptance test environment, you will have a production environment, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I think this should be enough for our demonstration. So now I can just run it. Let's see. Okay. And what we are going to do is call the demo endpoint. So once I have, I'm sure that everything started. Yes. I'm going here, create a new tab in Postman. And HTTP localhost 9090, if I correctly remember, and demo. And of course, what we need to observe now is that it shouldn't work, because if it does, then it's not okay. What we expect is a 4011 authorized, because we didn't add any tokens. So that's what we get, and that's fine. So it means that up to now, we know that at least our security implementation works. Now we have to see that it actually works also when we provide a good access token. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the flow as we did in the previous lessons and obtain a token. So let's copy this in the browser. If I remember, our user was something like Bill with password 12345 in the database. So let's try that. Bill 12345. And we get the authorization code. I'm copying the authorization code and use the token endpoint to get an access token. And this is our JWT access token. And I'm copying it, and let's actually put it in JWT.io to prove the way it looks like. So you see Bill, the client name, test is a header that we have added in the previous lesson. So it's exactly the way we left it, okay? That's basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to Postman, last tab, and say authorization, and then we need to add the bearer prefix always, followed by the access token. Always the syntax is bearer space access token. And then when I send this 200, okay, so our authentication worked successfully. So you see how easy this actually was, a matter of only configuring the key URI. But let's discuss a bit more than this, because that's first step. But one of the things that happens very often in real world applications is that you need to use different formats of the JWT token. Now our token looks like this. And we actually even learned at the authorization server side how to customize the body, the payload of the token. And you can make it a different way. There is a default way in which at the resource server side, the conversion works between the token and the authentication object that will be in the end stored in the security context, as we learned in the first couple of lessons of this stream. But very often you need a different implementation. So now what I want to do is add a breakpoint here, add a parameter of type authentication, and I'm going to start this in debug mode, and I'm going to see, I want to see exactly how the authentication looks like. So in case you don't know, Spring Security knows how to inject directly the authentication object if you give it as a parameter like this. Of course, the alternative is to write security context holder get context get authentication. So you can anytime get it anywhere using the get the security context holder class, but you can do it like this. Anyway, what I want to see is how this A actually looks like. So now I'm going to send again the request. And now I should see my app stopped in the breakpoint, and I should be able to investigate the authentication object, which contains by default the name. It contains all the details about the token in an unformatted way if you really want to take them, but I will show you a better way now which you want to do that. But the biggest question is usually with the authorities, because if you will go here, you will see that by default the authorities contained by the authentication are actually the client scopes. Very often you need to use either the authorities or roles of the user, or you want to use them together with the scopes. And if you use the default way, then you don't have them. You actually, the only place you can get them is in the token, claims, and even here now you don't have them actually because you didn't add them in the token at all, didn't we? So if I'm going in here, no, we don't even have them. So let's do two things. Let's first add them here in the authorization in the authorization server. Let's configure our authorization server as we learned last time to add here the authorities of the user. And then let's learn also how to get them in the resource server. That's very important from my point of view. And then you will know basically this is the most common situation with the roles and authorities, but it can be any other detail of the user or of the client that you want to exchange through the token. So that's theoretically, if we learn how to do with authorities, we cover the most cases, and you also know how to do any other less common cases, because it will be the same thing, isn't it? So we need to, in that case, change our implementation. So I'm going to skip this to the end, and I'm going to my authorization server. And if you remember, we can customize the token using a bin of type OAuth2 token customizer. We worked on this one of the last lessons. So I will leave this test here because it doesn't bother me, but what I want to add here is also the authorities, and we can, through the context, get the principal, I think. Look, here it is, and from the principal being the user, we get the authorities. If I get it like this, I think the authorities will be of type granted authority. So, because usually we know that the user details in Spring Security describes the user. Granted authority is the contract that describes the authority or the role. So this should be a list of granted authority. And then what I want is say something like context get claims claim authorities. And then basically this authorities doesn't even exist now, does it? So if I go here, I don't have it anywhere. So I want to add it here together with the list of authorities for the user to whom this was created. Maybe I'm actually curious. Did you even think about why the authorities don't appear by default in the token? Because sometimes students ask me why doesn't they appear, because it seems so natural to put them there. So why didn't they put them in the token from the very beginning? And the answer is, if you remember a few lessons ago when we discussed the OAuth2 in theory, this authorization code, which is indeed the most common grant type used, is a user dedicated grant type, which means that it's always a user that exists there. But remember, not all the grant types have a user. The client credentials grant type doesn't have a user. The device grant type doesn't have a user. So grant types don't necessarily have users. So that's why by default you can't add a user, since not all of them have users. So in this case, we will have to add the authorities ourselves. And that's basically what I was trying to do. If I keep it like this, adding these authorities this way, I'm not sure how will they actually look like, but I'm pretty sure this grant authority object, which most likely is implemented as a simple granted authority instance, most likely, I'm not totally sure, but it's most likely, will be converted into something like an object, a list of objects. If we do that, then we have to do the same thing when we read it on the other side. And that's not really comfortable. So instead of doing that, I would like to change this collection of granted authority. You can see it's exactly what I said. IntelliJ is smart enough to show me here, into simple strings. So only get the name of the authority. So let's just say stream map from authority to the name of the authority, and then convert this all into a list. So instead of having a list of granted authorities, we put in the string, a list of strings in the token. And that's first of all, it will be easier to read them on the other side. Secondly, it also kind of fulfills the Liskov principle here, because Liskov is one of the 5 solid principles. Because if I'm relying on the fact that always these get authorities methods say now it returns a list of simple grant authority implementations, if I rely on that, I might fall into a trap that in the future maybe Spring Security changes, and instead of the simple granted authority object, I will have some other implementation, which is pretty valid. They can do that because, you see, they use the contract. When a developer uses a contract and not in an implementation, it does that for a reason. It does that to make sure it absolutizes enough their implementation, and then the user should always rely on the contract and never on the implementation. Otherwise, if you do rely on the implementation, you will be against the Liskov principle that states that whenever you have an upper class or a contract, you should be able to replace any of the children instances in that variable, and it still works. Your algorithm still works correctly. And Barbara Liskov stated that, who is one of the most known women in tech. Thank you, Barbara, for that. Cool. And so theoretically that should be it. Now I put the authorities. Let me restart. Let me retrigger the whole flow to create a token, and test first that we have the authorities there, that they look the way we like, and then let's see how we implement something on the other side, meaning in the resource server. Okay, it started. So flow, let's take it, and then same thing, I'm going here, redirect it to login, bill 1 2 3 4 5, sign in, get the authorization code, and I'm going to put it here, and I get the new JWT, copying it, and let's see how it looks like now. And here are authorities. Okay, you see they appear now, and indeed it's a collection of strings, so it's basically what we expected, is the way we wanted them to be. So now that we have them in the token, you just can go here and make sure you put them in the authentication. If I'm doing the same thing now, so if I'm going to the get endpoint and I'm replacing the token with the new one, they will appear in the raw token. Here they are. See, the raw token now contains the list of authorities, but they will still not be in the authorities attribute of the authentication. That will still be, of course, the default implementation, meaning that this will contain the list of scopes rather than the list of authorities. And that's basically what we need to change if you want to use authorities and not scopes. And if we don't change that, well, you can theoretically rely on the claims when you write post-authorized and pre-authorized annotations and other kind of rules, but I don't recommend you to do that. If you ever see a syntax looking like this, you will see it's not comfortable. Whenever you want to have something in the authorization rules, you need to take values from here and put them directly into your authentication object to have the authorization rules as simple as possible defined. Okay, I see some other questions. I will take them from the last one to the first. What is the difference between scope and authority? Scopes are for the client, authority are for the user. So kind of the same thing, but one is the application's roles and the other one is the user's roles. Having multiple scopes, does OpenID cover all the scopes? So OpenID Connect is a protocol over OAuth2 that limits to a few scopes. Profile, email, OpenID are some examples of the scopes, but if you want to know all the details about the protocol, I recommend you read the documentation. What you need to know, however, is how all the specification of OAuth2 works, and only in case of OAuth2, plain OAuth2, you can use any kind of scope you'd like. Is it possible to build some kind of chain of resource server, passes the validation keystroke and then so multiple filters? Yes, it's possible. Of course, it requires some customization, but it's possible. And then I'm not sure if I missed anything. Okay, no, I think I already answered those one. And what is the difference between, okay, answer in case authorization server restarts with different signing keys, does resource server need to be restarted? No, it doesn't, because you set up here the URI. URI will still be the same. So even if in my case, because I think that's where the question comes from, even in my case, these keys are in memory, which, by the way, remember, it's not usually the case of a real app. A real app would consume the configured pairs from somewhere. We discussed that in a previous lesson. But here, of course, they are in memory. We generated them when the bin is created at the startup of the application. They are always different when you restart the application. But since you provide the resource server with the URI, the resource server will always have the real, the actual public keys, and that's basically also where the advantage is when you do key rotations. No, because you have to rotate only the pair in one place, in the authorization server side place. You don't have to do anything on the resource side. You don't have to do anything. Cool. So let's figure out now. We were in the situation where we wanted to figure out how to actually put the authorities the way we want them, and how to maybe eventually have both of them, how to have even more details in the authentication. I think I don't have plenty of time today, so what I will do is just sharing with you how to how to get the authorities, so to finalize our example. And then in the next lesson I will continue with a part 2 of the resource server where we deal with a lot of more things, including the OPAC tokens. Good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually set up here a JVT Authentication Converter, which is an object, as IntelliJ shows here, that has to implement the converter contract. Converter is an interface, it's a contract that changes the JVT into anything of type abstract authentication token. So we actually, if we go here, you see its definition. Now, if you will check, the abstract authentication token is actually an above class over the JVT, over multiple classes, but including the JVT authentication token, which is basically the exact one. I forgot to show you, but it's actually the exact implementation you should have seen here when we were in the debug mode. I prefer to keep the same and customize directly over the JVT authentication token. Okay. So instead of directly inheriting abstract authentication token, I will inherit JVT authentication token. So I'm going to create a custom JVT authentication token converter, which should implement converter of type JVT and JVT authentication token, something like that. And we need to implement the convert methods. The convert method is basically converting the plain token into a JVT authentication token. And then this one will be actually configured here. You will just have to add an instance like this. So let's see if it's working for us. So how do I do it? Create an object of this type, token, which is actually is not token, is wrongly called token, because this is actually the authentication object, which we in the end return. And here, as the minimum you need is the JVT itself, and that's what you have, the plain token, and then the authorities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the authorities as a list of granted authority, from the source get claim actually get claims, I think it's the same thing, authorities, or whatever the name of the claim is. Let's validate again. So this is the name of the claim. Okay, and then this gives me a list of strings, because that's what I created, and then I need to actually change this into a list of granted authorities. I think it's actually easier if I take it like a list of strings to be easier to be seen. And this is, I'm pretty sure this is a list of strings, so it should be working with a simple cast. And then you just write here, from authorities, map them to granted authorities using any implementation. The easiest is to use the simple granted authority implementation we discussed from the beginning of this lesson. And that's it. So now, keeping my breakpoint here, I'm going to restart the application and reuse the token. And okay, it started. And I'm going to use again the same token. 401 most likely because it expired. Yeah, let's see if it is if it expired or not. Actually, we have it here. Expiration time 43 is 49, so it indeed expired. What I do recommend you to save a lot of time, but only in development. What you can do is give a larger expiration time to the token, so you can easily do that with the token settings, and then you can say access token time to leave, duration of, and for dev you can actually do whatever you want. You can say of hours 24, something like this. Now we anyway have to take the flow and retake the flow and create a new token, and I will use that token, and we can also prove that the access time to leave has changed. It should show tomorrow. While it's restarting, more questions I see here. In case authorization server restarts, I already answered that. Does resource server in the private key? Yes, it does, and it has one. So whenever we create an authorization server, what we create here is a key pair. So the authorization server has basically both the private and the public key. The authorization server uses the private key to sign the token, but exposes the public keys so that resource servers can use them to validate the tokens. Can any resource server connect to any authorization server if it knows the URI? Yes, you don't need to prevent it. I think you can actually add basic authentication to that endpoint if you really want, because it's customizable, but why would you do that? I mean, they are called public keys for a reason. Yeah, if you have the public key, the only thing you can do is to validate the token, say that's valid or not. You can't do anything else. So you see, there is no reason to actually add any restriction over that endpoint. Having multiple scopes, does OpenID cover all scopes, or it is something on its own? So OpenID has some defined scopes. Okay, you can only use those if you use the OpenID Connect protocol. But if you use simply the OAuth2, you can use any kind of scope and even multiple scopes. The application started, so now it's time to do one more time the flow. Copy it. Paste it. One, two, three, four, five. Take it and get the token. So I'm taking the new token and let's check it. Okay, looks similar. Expiration time is Jan 21. Today I'm in 20 still, so that means 1 day because I set it to 24 hours. So this one should be usable for a long time for me now. And I'm going here and I'm saying, yeah, here it is. And I'm going to my breakpoint. And authorities are the real authorities now. So here it is, exactly what we wanted. And if you really want, and that's the last thing I'm going to show today, opaque tokens, I'm going to do that in the next lesson because we don't have time now. So in the next lesson, thank you for the questions. In the next lesson, you will find out how to use opaque tokens and some other things. But let's close today. If you want to have even more than this, remember that here you can even customize this object. So instead of using the JVT authentication token, you can create a custom JVT authentication token, which extends this class. It needs at least a constructor. So we can keep the same constructor we used. And then here you can have any attribute you'd like. So you can have an attribute blah blah. Okay, and you can set this to anything. It's just an example. You can have anything you want. There are situations where you have to augment your authentication with something from other systems. In the token, you might have some attributes that are totally different. You can't. The JWT authentication token is not designed for absolutely everything. If you really want something custom, you create a custom authentication. And now it's pretty easy. You just make sure you use this one. Okay. And that's it. Now it will basically work with any additional details you want. And those additional details can all be used in the authorizations. Okay, and you see it here. So you can customize it any way you want. Okay, this is everything. I have a few more minutes. I will only take a few more questions and then I will quit, but you can keep your questions or put them in the comment section, and then you will see me also next time when we discuss the second part. Also, before the end, let me actually share with you one more code. So guys, this is a free code for the ebook for my MIP, second edition of Spring Security in Action. The first lucky one who will use either the first or the second code I shared with you will be able to use them to get the ebook. And please do share your thoughts and feedback on the book as well if you got the ebook. Otherwise, stay tuned on this channel because I will share some more with you. Now, opaque tokens, I already said I will be covering them in the next lessons. Incoming request details, URI headers. I'm not sure exactly where are you thinking to put them, but if they are in the token, the same as I added this attribute, you can add anything else. So then you can compare with what you have in your database. Maybe that already answers your question. Thank you also for being here. And is there a replacement for Keycloak config adapter in Spring Boot 3 resource server? I'm not sure. Keycloak is Keycloak. Spring Boot 3 is Spring Boot 3. I mean, the Keycloak is an authorization server. Spring Boot 3 resource server is a resource server. I'm not sure how can you have a replacement for. Yeah, maybe you should put that question in a comment with some more details, because I don't really understand it, and then I will come back and answer you. Default filter chain makes my Microsoft go red but still work. Maybe you are using an old version of IntelliJ. Cool, guys, if those are the main questions, then I will say again, thank you everyone. I know you have a lot of questions. I know I can't answer them in one lesson, but I'm pretty sure I'll be here for the next lesson and the next one and the next one. So put your questions in the comment section, find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and of course meet me for the next videos as well. And until then, guys, I say thank you very much. Have an excellent day, have an excellent time for studying further, and an excellent rest of the day, and meet you soon. Cheers everyone.